My maid of honor assaulted my father at my wedding, and half the guests think she's a hero for it. I want to tell you about the 15 seconds between when it happened and when I understood it, because those 15 seconds were the most confused and clarifying of my life. The reception was well underway. My father had made his toast, warm and appropriate. I was dancing with my new husband, and over his shoulder, I saw my maid of honor walk across the room with the specific purpose of someone who had decided something, and then I saw her reach my father, and I saw her say something I could not hear, and I saw him say something back, and then I saw her slap him. It was not a movie slap. It was a real one. Full arm. The specific sound a hand makes when it strikes a face with actual force behind it. My father stumbled. He was holding his cheek. My maid of honor was standing in front of him with her hand still raised and her face doing something specific, which was not regret. Then she turned and walked toward the bathroom with the composure of someone who had done something she had been thinking about for a long time and was now finished with it. The room was doing several things at once. Some people were looking at my father, some at her retreating back, some at me, and some people, I noticed with particular attention, were looking at their plates in the specific way people look at their plates when they already know something the room is in the process of finding out. I walked across the room, not toward my father, toward the bathroom. Rosie was my best friend of 15 years. She did not do things without reason. I walked past the people looking at their plates. I registered who they were. I filed the list. She was washing her hands. She did not look up. She said, "I will understand if you want me to leave." I said, "Tell me what happened." She said, "Your father made a comment to me when I passed him on the way back from the bathroom. It was not the first comment he has made to me. It was the worst of the ones he has made." She said she had been planning to tell me after the wedding. She had been managing it for a long time and thought she could make it through one more day, but the comment tonight was the kind she could not make it through. I said, "How long?" She said, 4 years, since the rehearsal dinner for your brother's wedding." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She said, "I went home and I started writing you an email and I couldn't figure out how to write it without destroying everything. And I told myself I would figure out how to write it later, and later turned into 4 years." I walked out. I walked up to my father. He was at the head table holding a napkin to his cheek. He looked up preparing to tell me his version. I said, "I need you to leave the reception." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I know what you said to her tonight. I know what you've been saying to her for 4 years. I need you to leave." He said, "She's lying." I said, "I have been looking at this room and I can see who has been looking at their plates, and the list is not short. We will discuss this tomorrow." He left. I found my husband Brian. I said, "I need my maid of honor." He got her. She came out with redone makeup. We looked at each other across the dance floor. I opened my arms. She came to me. We hugged for a long time. Half the room started clapping. The other half did not. We danced for the rest of the night. The morning after, Brian and I sat at the kitchen table with coffee that was too strong because I had measured it wrong. He said, "Before you talk to your father, can I tell you something?" He said during the reception. Before the slap, he had seen my father Aramis lean toward Rosie at the bar. He was 10 feet away. He saw Rosie's face change. The change was fast and specific, the kind that made him almost walk over. He didn't hear what was said. He told himself it was probably nothing. 20 minutes later, Rosie walked across the room and slapped him, and Brian realized it had not been nothing. He said, "I should have gone over. I almost did, and I didn't." I called Rosie. I said I needed the exact words, not the general version. Rosie told me. The comment was sexual, specific in a way I am not going to repeat here. It was said with a smile. It was delivered in the tone of a joke so that if anyone overheard it, they would think it was funny, and if Rosie reacted, they would think she couldn't take a joke. She said, "He always said them like they were jokes. That was the whole point. So if I ever told anyone, he could say I misunderstood." I said, "Walk me through all of it, the 4 years." She described a pattern. The comments happened at family events, always when I was not close enough to hear, always framed as humor or flattery, always with just enough room for him to back out if she pushed back. The rehearsal dinner 4 years ago. He found her at the coat check, stood too close, said something about her dress that made her skin crawl. She smiled and walked away because he was my father, and it was my brother's rehearsal dinner. A birthday party where he commented on her body while they carried plates. A holiday dinner where he found her alone in the hallway. A cookout last summer where he put his hand on her back and leaned in and said something that made her leave early and tell me she had a headache. Each time a little more. Each time the line moved further. Each time the same smile. I said, "Who else knew?" Rosie said, "I don't know for sure, but people saw things. I could tell by the way they looked at me afterward." I texted 3 people from my list, the people who had been looking at their plates. "I need to talk to you about my father. Please be honest with me." 2 responded. One woman had seen Aramis say something to Rosie at a family event about a year ago. Rosie's reaction was enough to know it was not a normal conversation. She told her husband in bed that night. They talked about whether to tell me. She decided she didn't know enough. The second person had been at the cookout. He heard enough to know it wasn't right, but assumed Rosie would handle it. He said, "I figured if it was really bad, she would say something." The third person did not respond at all. That silence was itself an answer. I drove to Aramis's house. He looked tired. He made tea, got 2 mugs from the cabinet. The whole thing was so normal, so much like every other time I had sat at that counter, that for a moment I forgot why I was there. He said Rosie had always been sensitive. He said he made one comment at the reception that he now realized was not appropriate. He said, "One bad joke. I had too much to drink. She hit me in front of 200 people at my daughter's wedding." His eyes were wet. His voice got softer. He said, "I am your father. I have loved you every day of your life, and I am asking you to consider the possibility that your friend overreacted." For 30 seconds, I believed him. 30 seconds sitting in the kitchen where I grew up, holding a warm mug, looking at the face that had leaned over my bed when I was sick and read to me every night and called me every Sunday. For 30 seconds, I almost opened my mouth and apologized. Then I remembered the 2 phone calls. The woman who told her husband in bed, the man at the cookout, Brian saying Rosie's face changed in a way that made him almost walk over, Rosie at the coat check, the hallway, the cookout, 4 years. I said, "It wasn't one comment." His expression flickered. Not surprise. Recalculation. I said, "It has been 4 years since Amos's rehearsal dinner." He was quiet. 3 seconds. 3 seconds does not sound long, but when your father has just been told something an innocent person would deny immediately, 3 seconds is long enough to hear the truth in the silence. Then he said, "Who told you that?" An innocent man would have said, "That's not true." A guilty man asks about the source. Amos. I stood up. I said, I came here hoping you would be honest with me. You are not being honest with me. He reached for my arm. He said, your friend has problems. She has always had problems. She is jealous of your family, and she is using this to drive a wedge between us. I pulled my arm away, and I saw something in his face I had never seen before, or maybe never let myself see. A man who was not trying to explain himself, but was trying to manage me. I said, I will not sit here and listen to you call my best friend a liar when I have talked to other people who saw it too. His face changed, not to remorse, to something cold and calculating. He said, who did you talk to? I walked out, past the family pictures, past the photo of me at 5 on his shoulders, past the photo of me and Rosie at graduation. I closed the door and sat in my car until my hands stopped shaking. 2 days later, Amos called. My brother. He sounded tight, rehearsed. He said, Dad called me. He says you're cutting him off because Rosie made up some story. I said, Rosie didn't make it up. Amos was quiet. Then he said, I know. Everything in me stopped. He said, at my rehearsal dinner, I saw him talking to her near the coat check. I didn't hear what he said, but I saw her face. I asked her later if she was okay, and she said she was fine, and I let it go. I said, you saw something 4 years ago and you never told me. He said, I didn't know what I saw. And then time passed, and it felt too late. I said, it was never too late. I called Rosie. I told her about Amos. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, he asked me if I was okay that night. I almost told him, but I thought, that's her brother. If I tell him, it blows up the whole family. So I said I was fine. I sat on the kitchen floor. My legs just did it. I said, you protected my family for 4 years, and my family didn't protect you. Rosie said, you are protecting me now. That is what matters. Over the next day, Aramis left 3 voicemails. The first was warm. I love you. Please call me. We can work this out. The second was tighter. You are being unfair. I deserve the chance to defend myself. The third was different. Controlled, but not calm. He said, if you keep going down this road, you are going to damage this family in ways you cannot undo. Think about your mother. Think about Amos. Brian listened to the third one and said, that's not a man asking for forgiveness. That's a man trying to keep control. The first voicemail was the father I loved asking his daughter to come home. The second was a man who felt owed something. The third was a warning. And the warning was not about the family. It was about what would happen to me if I kept pulling on this thread. I called Amos. I told him I was going to confront our father with everything I knew. He said, do you want me to come? I said, yes. We drove to Aramis's house together. We didn't talk. The radio was off. He saw both of us at the door and his face did 2 things. First, surprise, then irritation. He said, so this is an ambush. I said, this is a conversation. You can have it or close the door, but if you close the door, that is the last time you close a door on me. We sat in the living room. I told him I had spoken to Rosie in detail. Every comment, every event. I told him I had spoken to people who confirmed it. I told him Amos had seen something at his own rehearsal dinner. Aramis looked at Amos. Amos said, I saw you at the coat check, Dad. I saw her face. I should have said something then. I'm saying something now. Aramis said, they are all wrong. I said, then tell me what you said to her at the reception. He said, I made a joke. A bad joke. I said, what was the joke? He said, I don't remember exactly. I said, you remember. You have had 5 days to think about it. I waited. I did not fill the silence. Amos did not fill it either. The clock ticked, and I watched the performance leave my father's face. It did not leave all at once. It left in pieces. The warm eyes went first, then the soft mouth, then the open-handed posture I had been looking at my entire life. What was left was flat. Not sad, not sorry, just done. He said, I said things I shouldn't have said to your friend more than once. Is that what you wanted to hear? I said, no, that is not what I wanted to hear, but it is what I needed to hear. I said, I love you. You are my father, and I will always love you, but I do not trust you right now until you are willing to take real responsibility, not the version where you're the victim of everyone's overreaction, but real responsibility. I need distance. You will not be at my home. You will not be at events where Rosie is present, and if you contact Rosie for any reason, this conversation will be the last one we have. He said, you are choosing her over me. I said, I am choosing the truth over the version of you that I wanted to be real. Aramis looked at Amos. Amos said quietly, she's not wrong, Dad. Aramis stood up. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to us, looking out at the yard where Amos and I had played as kids. He did not turn around. He did not say another word. We stood up. We walked out. We closed the door. Neither of us looked back. I called Rosie. I told her everything. The conversation, the admission, the way Aramis stood at the window with his back to us. Rosie cried. Not from sadness. From the specific relief of a person who had carried something alone for 4 years and had finally set it down. I said, you should have never had to carry that by yourself. She said, I don't have to anymore. That night, Brian held me on the couch. I said, I keep thinking about the wedding, about all those people looking at their plates. Brian said, you didn't look at your plate. You got up and you walked across the room. I thought about how 15 seconds of confusion on a dance floor had led to 5 days of the hardest conversations of my life. I thought about how my father was still my father and I still loved him, and that loving someone and seeing them clearly were 2 things I was learning to do at the same time. I did not know if Aramis would ever take real responsibility. I knew that I had asked him to. I knew that Rosie was sleeping in her own bed tonight without the weight of a secret. I knew that was enough for now.